Ex-prisoners. What is the saddest thing you've ever seen in prison? A 57-year-old man on a life sentence high on spice, synthetic psychoactive cannabinoids, crawling around on the floor screaming because he can see his dead mother towering over him looking at him in disgust.
Not a pleasant thing to see. Edit. Especially when you're stuck in a cell with him.
Edit 2. Doing the same drug I've mentioned above, a 22-year-old man ended up flooding his cell, setting it on fire and killing himself whilst on the drug, 2 months before finishing his sentence. Another one is where a guy sliced his fucking dick in half, and again set fire to his cell, because the drug made him think erections are evil.
So yay, stay away from spice.
When I was young, juvie, I was 15 or 16 at the time.
Most of us there were older teens.
11-year-old kid was brought in
for throwing rocks at one of his teacher's homes.
Had an older fat guard who worked there. These were generally civilian guards, given we were juveniles.
Well, this guy, named Travis,
started being weird with the kid. At first kid was like any other 11-year-old. Happy-go-lucky.
Travis got really handsy with him. At mealtimes he was like actively rubbing on him.
We all saw it, was a lockdown facility, so we weren't let out of our cells much either, but we all witnessed it.
Guy was like rubbing his back, touching his leg.
Within a few days, kid's whole attitude changed.
We all knew Travis was molesting him, even though we couldn't prove it. I knew a guy who was never in trouble in his life. He was working in the automotive industry in Michigan and lost his job. He fell behind with child support payments and ended up doing time in jail.
His very first night his two cellmates got into an argument because one of them couldn't find his bear claw snack.
They finally stopped arguing and went to sleep.
In the middle of the night, he was woken up by the guy beating the guy he accused of theft.
He literally beat the guy to death.
Apparently he had gotten a hold of some kind of pole or stick. The entire cell was just completely covered in blood. They end up finding out that the guy he accused of stealing it didn't steal it after all. I'll never forget the fear and look in guy's eyes when he told me what happened. My brother had 3 gold teeth.
They were ripped out in the first few months of being in prison. He said he lost them in a fight, but a guard told us that he was probably held down and had them forcefully pulled out judging by the damage to his gums. There was a guy whose girlfriend broke up with him while he was inside. So just before we walked out to go to lunch he had slit his wrists.
His cellmate had to explain to the officer that he didn't do it, he did it to himself.
Edit. Wow. I can't believe this blew up the way that it did. I appreciate all of the upvotes. I have plenty of stories from being on the inside which are either funny or very depressing to think about. I knew a guy who was very kind and in prison for just a parole violation because he stole something. He was a homeless guy. He was a bit goofy and had schizophrenia or something, but a really nice guy.
Anyway, he got sent to Seg for some reason and the guards ended up beating him to death there.
I believe the guards who did it are in prison themselves now.
Can't believe that happened.
Rip Larry. Edit. Here's the article. I was working on servery, so I was out of my cell every day all day. One day I was told by the screw to check on the cells on the ground floor. I opened one of the door flaps and this guy, he was standing in the middle of the room, with shirt off, crying. Then proceeded to slash both his wrists. Called help, he made it. But not long after hung himself.
A guy we worked out with found out his dad killed his wife, mom and their child, then killed himself.
He went to his cell for a while and after like 40 minutes he was screaming for help.
Stumbled out of his cell with his wrists all cut up and also cut up his neck real bad too. Unfortunately he didn't make it more than a few steps out of his cell before falling and going unresponsive. That was almost as rough as when my best friend's brother decided to blow the back of his skull off in the room next to us. In Everglades Correctional down near Miami. Dot was in the box for positive drug test and seen white boy being molested by bunkie up against door screaming for his life and at night nobody is coming. SMH. Still hear his screams.
I was in for 12 years, South Florida, got out in 2019. Older gentleman and fresh in was constantly crying and screaming about his dogs and how he misses them, won't be able to pet them, just absolutely breaking down. His roommate got sick of the screaming and crying and ended up breaking the guy's hands and sawing his fingers off so he couldn't pet his dogs anymore. Truly some horrific stuff. There was a person who went to prison and cried all the time.
He never spoke, but after a while it became clear that the officer forced him to confess that he had killed a person. Otherwise he would rape his sister in front of his eyes.
He confessed and received a life sentence. We are in a very conservative country. English is not my first language.
Had a stint in juvie way back during COVID. A 13-year-old girl was the only other person I could talk to since her intake day was the same as mine. Social distancing BS.
Jesus, her story was intense. Long story short, she was in there because of a brutal fight with her druggy mom. She had two choices: lose her only family member to jail and have to go into foster care, or lie and take the fault so she would be the one locked up. Genuinely almost brought me to tears. She had so many cuts and bruises. There was a guy on the yard convinced he was going to be transformed into a chicken for his crimes later in life. Crazy, really. Just all the people with severe mental illness that shouldn't be there. And in an immigration jail, I saw a Korean die from AIDS-related issues as the jail wouldn't supply him with any medication. In the same jail, a friend ended up with multiple cancer tumors caused by lack of treatment for prostate cancer. The jail refused to bring him to the hospital for over 2 years. By the time he got the diagnosis for the prostate cancer, it had already spread to his liver, lungs, colon and bones. Terminal. He died about 2 months after I got released. I was once stood up for a visit. My friend booked it and didn't show, so I had to wait in the holding cells whilst everyone went on their visits.
After an hour, a guy from my area came back off his visit looking visibly shaken, upset. He went on to tell me that his girlfriend and mother to his kids had just told him she had terminal cancer. Sadly, she died not long after. This was like 12 years ago. To make matters worse, the guy's face popped up on my Facebook the other week as he was murdered. Made me think of them kids, possibly adults now, parentless.